There we are, live on YouTube. Good morning, everybody. You're here with Lynn Johnson, Bruce Rawles, and we are reading the amazing book, A Symphony of Love by, well, not by Dr. Kenneth Wapnick, but it's the story of Dr. Kenneth Wapnick. Um, and there are several different things here, not just life story, but poems, all sorts of things. I'm really excited about it and having fun reading about Ken. We read all about Helen. We've read all about Bill. Now we're reading about Ken. and Gosh, there's so many of them out there that are originators. And I was just thinking yesterday, someone was mentioning there's all the controversy about the editing and everything, and who was there when all this editing was going on, of Course in Miracles. And one person that was there that never gets mentioned, isn't really talked about because he wasn't really consequential to the scribing or the editing or any part of it, but was there as a personal um, friend of Helen's, is John Mundy. And, John Mundy was like Helen's adopted son. And, he was a college kid, I think, when he first met her, and she, um, counseled him through relationships and breakups and all sorts of things, but he was there the whole time. Uh, and he was when they were doing the actual editing of the course, he was very well aware that they were asking Jesus about every single part of it. There's not one edit in what is the Course in Miracles as is uh, published by the Foundation uh, for Inner Peace, that there's not one thing that happened in there that was not a collaboration between Helen and Jesus. And so, someone was coming up yesterday with their thoughts that, Ken was the editor and he decided what should go and what shouldn't, and all the things that people have accused Ken of. It was impossible, really, for Ken to have done any of those things because Helen was a very strong character and definitely did not. Uh, she barely let Jesus talk to her about it, let's say Ken or Bill or anybody else. Anyway, so, but just thinking about that, John is one of the living persons, him and maybe Tam Morgan, a few other people who are still around, who knew Helen and who knew Ken and who knew, kind of what was going on. So, as long as we got these people in our lives still, we have, the pros from Dover, the people who were really there. And I think I'm so fortunate to at least have made friends with John Mundy, and I know that you were friends with Tam, and other people from the foundation. You met Judy and all these other people. So
Yeah. And I did meet Jeff Siebert and some other folks at the Foundation for A Course in Miracles, the sister organization, when I went to Temecula. I didn't quite get there in time to meet Ken. Missed him by a year and a half or so, but I did get to meet a number of the folks that were full-time Ken students and staff at the foundation before they moved that foundation to Henderson, Nevada. I worked on the FIP website for, gosh, 4, 5, 6 years. And it's been almost that, I think, now since I worked on it, but because it was right when I moved to Colorado that we got an inquiry from Deb Roberts and say, hey, anybody like to redo the website? And I said, yeah, sure. But
yeah, sure.
yeah, it's interesting. All the controversy stuff, I've kind of sort of off my radar for the most part. The groups I attend on a regular basis, kind of more focused on the content rather than the controversy. But I know it's still out there. And I was thinking, as you were saying that, Lynn, that any sane thoughts we've ever had, any of us have been in collaboration with Jesus or Holy Spirit, and any insane thoughts that any of us have been in cahoots with the ego.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really pretty simple, isn't it? When you distill it down to the two thought systems, and that's really all there is what's real and eternally true and everything, and what's false and just a blip in the cosmic dream of duality, that's really nothing. And that's what we're here to unlearn. And we've overlearned the insanity, so now we have to um, make what seems to be effort uh, while we're undoing until we realize it's really effortless, from the Holy Spirit's perspective, because we're really undoing nothing. That's I think we're slowly learning that when we really actually allow ourselves to forgive, there's a relief and a release from the tyranny of the ego that is automatic when we do that, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean that, and it is a relief. If you're suffering, let it go. Go to the Holy Spirit and let the Holy Spirit inform you. And and you won't be suffering anymore.
Uh-huh.
That's bottom line. Uh that's the end of suffering, the end of death, the end of fear, the end of everything that would have been a symbol of our uh the reality of our mistake. The fact is it's a mistake and nothing happened. So
Mhm.
it's such a great gift to be here.
It really is. As you're saying that, I was thinking one of my favorite lines in the course is, "Son of God, you have not sinned, but you have been much mistaken."
That's a mistake.
I mean, that changes everything. It's not a crime. I mean, what we think was a crime was impossible, to separate from perfect oneness and trash heaven, trash God, throw the creator under the bus. It's like, well, no, that can't happen. We can dream it can, and our dreams are really elaborate, and we've overlearned, and the the insanity of thinking that we pulled it off, and we made up a world to keep the unconscious guilt out of our mind. But it's unfounded, and when we look at it with the Holy Spirit, and we see that there's no real basis for the guilt, and then it disappears. But only when we look at it and see the full depth and breadth and girth of, of the insanity of the ego. It's like there's just nothing there. It
Nothing.
vanished. Our hands close on thin air when we reach to grasp it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. And we'll look at like today's lesson, a couple of lines into today's lesson that just really cracked me up, actually, saying, "Straighten my mind, my father. It is sick."
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. And sickness really is applied to the mind in the course, and it's so easy to think it's about the body, but that's just a reflection. And if the body's in the mind, then it's really the mind that can be seem to be diseased and not easy.
Yeah,
But the ease is our natural state, and the dis-ease is the self-imposed, self-inflicted, um, masochistic uh, wish of the ego to inflict pain and suffering on uh, what it considers to be a criminal activity, and we're all self-incriminating. So that's pretty silly, isn't it?
it is pretty silly. And thank goodness, we can just look at that and say, wow, it is sick and let it go and
Hmm.
not give it another thought.
Yeah.
Just let the Holy Spirit take over.
Yep.
So I love that. So we're reading, like I said, A Symphony of Love. Um, and it's the story basically, or a lot of different things that Ken Wapnick wrote, or the stories about Ken Wapnick that I believe his wife Gloria put together as a kind of a tribute to him. So we've just been reading about uh, the uh, uh, the dissertation that he did on Saint Teresa of Avila,
Uh-huh.
and how I mean seriously, how he was able to, kind of talk about that maybe she wasn't crazy, and she really was hearing the voice of God, or the voice of the Holy Spirit, or and asking other psychologists, how would you know the difference? I think that's the basic thing of his dissertation was, you can't assume that, just because science in the world tells you it's there's not a voice from somewhere else that's speaking to you. How would you know? And how could you know? Anyway, so uh, I guess maybe I'll read for a while.
Sure.
Okay. So uh, he says, my quote unquote political struggles in having my dissertation finally accepted had given me a solid education in how to live in the professional world and still be faithful to this other part of me. I was now careful to keep the two parts separate, and for the next 4 years grew increasingly more skillful in doing so. So, he had his spiritual life and his psychology life, his scientific life. And at that time, those two things did not go together. That's why his dissertation was uh, so skillful, that he was able to actually put those two things together and make a common uh, argument that uh, you know that other people could understand and agree, or at least understand and acknowledge. So he's saying now he still kept his these two worlds apart,
Hmm.
and he had to be skillful in doing it. The difference lay in that the separation now enabled me to develop more fully the spiritual aspects of my life rather than denying them as I had previously done. And if I now were dilatory in this regard, it was seen to that I continued in the proper direction. I'm going to look up that word. Can I do that? What is happening here? I guess maybe.
Yeah, that's the words that I don't use very much either. Let's
Yeah,
see.
okay. Slow to act. He had been dilatory in appointing a solicitor, another word I don't generally use. Intended to cause delay, they resorted to dilatory tactics, forcing a postponement of peace talks. So delay tactics, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Foot dragging,
Foot dragging, yeah. Footsteps. Okay.
procrastinating.
All in one little word.
Yep.
Which, dilettante, and there's a lot of words that come out of that. So
Mm,
uh
I understand.
and if I now were dilatory in this regard, it was seen to that I continued in the proper direction. This experience was expressed in an image that would come to me from time to time. It was of my standing still, suddenly being pushed forward by a huge rock. The rock was gentle but quite persistent in its efforts, and I had no recourse but to inch along. It would never occur to me to get out of its way or change paths. So he would just have this vision in his mind of just standing still and being pushed forward by a huge rock. Uh, I I can see that. In the middle of the following year, 1969, I came to a rather important decision. I had just completed an article expanding some discarded material from my dissertation, and I knew it was good, but I now felt tired of an intellectual style of writing and wished to write more creatively from my soul instead of with my head was the way I instead of with my head was the way I think I expressed it at the time. From God instead of about him, I think would be closer to the truth. Shortly thereafter, I felt myself drawn to the Old Testament and the figure of Moses, and thus began my first venture into creative writing. But this would be a good time to insert a digression about my relationship to Judaism. And so, as we know, Ken was a Jew, grew up as a Jew, became baptized as a Catholic, so that he could, whatever, go into the monastery. But you know, I think it's so interesting. Anyway, I'm gonna uh,
Yeah, I think
turn
he
the page.
explains his connection with Judaism
Right,
here.
and so I'm
here.
gonna let you read this.
Okay. Um, I'll start that paragraph over. I've already mentioned that I was born into a Jewish family. My parents belonged to a conservative congregation, but we were not religious in any true sense of the word, as they did not seem to believe in God. They attended synagogue once a year during the high holidays and kept a kosher home. However, this was done in respect to my maternal grandmother, who did keep most of the observances. Outside of the house, we ate as we pleased. I should mention that my father had been born and reared in Poland, and he came from an Orthodox, i.e., highly religious home. Get my scroll bar here. Okay, and as a child had received a thorough Jewish education, but as an adult, and certainly at the time he was married, religion ceased to have any importance in his life. So, kind of Jewish in name, but not in regular practice. It sounds like in his family. Despite this lack of religious feeling, I went to a yeshiva elementary school, or yeshiva, I guess that's how it's pronounced. This is a parochial school where Hebrew subjects are taught in the morning and English ones in the afternoon. My parents sent me here because they felt the English education I would receive would be superior to that in regular public school. My Hebrew education was quite thorough, and for 8 very long years, I was taught every aspect of Jewish language, thought, and religion. This included the Bible, rabbinical commentary, Jewish law, history, customs, grammar, and general culture. I hated every minute of it. I'm, I must have presented quite a problem to the school, as where my English grades were consistently high, my Hebrew performance, both academically and behaviorally, left something to be desired. When I was old enough at last to understand what was meant by God, I resented the manner he was rammed down our throats and how the words of the Bible were taught as if they were absolutely true, when it was clear to me then that a lot of what was written could not have actually occurred. I remember sitting in class one day in sixth grade, listening to the teacher relate the story of Joshua making the sun stand still. I turned to a friend next to me, who at the very same moment turned to me, and simultaneously we both said, "Bull." I know I read this probably a few years ago now, but I've forgotten about this little story. It is one of those ironies God must enjoy that 20 years later I was to be staying in a monastery overlooking those very plains where Joshua once stood, a time for me which saw the deepening and solidifying of my experience of and faith in a God who indeed could make the sun stand still. Although my parents had given me the option of going to a public school if I so wished, I had decided to remain. Mainly, I think, because I at least felt comfortable in the school and did not relish the thought of going into a strange new place where I would not know anyone. But when I graduated at the end of the 8th grade, there was no question but that I would go to a public school. Enough was enough. And so came what I thought would be the end of all further connection to Hebrew and Judaism. There were still some of the cultural aspects of the religion which I enjoyed. However, like the majority of Jewish families, the absence of religious belief did not preclude a strong identification with the Jewish people and the land of Israel, nor in keeping some of the cultural observances such as the Passover Seder, New Year feasts, and the Hanukkah menorah. think I pronounced this right. But by and large, I resented my Jewish heritage, and I felt I could live just as well without it for the rest of my life. You want to pick up from there?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is kind of me in Catholic school. I left Catholic school at seventh grade was the last year
Yeah.
uh, that I was in Catholic school, and went into public school in the eighth grade, which was just a huge culture shock, which I cannot even describe to you. uh, to suddenly be in a place where you could wear whatever you wanted, basically, and wear makeup and all sorts of things. And there was lots of stuff going on that, we didn't have boys on one side of the classroom and girls on the other side, a playground for boys and a playground for girls. And there was no, even in the lunch, we had lunch like in the basement of the church. Even that was segregated.
Hmm.
So that the whole thing of going into public school with all its insanity, it just seemed crazy to me. So I was, yeah. So I can kind of see where this would have been kind of a big deal to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for the most part, through high school and college, I did. And so, no one was more surprised than I when I felt this very strong identification with Moses and experienced a real sense of homecoming as I reread the five books of the Torah. I was
Hmm.
even surprised at how much of the Hebrew I had retained, along with a feeling for the language. The decision to, quote, write from my soul, unquote, had evidently freed a part of my inner life I had not known existed. And what emerged, not only in terms of Judaism, but in terms of myself, truly surprised and even frightened me. The short novel was completed in about a week's time, although it took well over a year and several rewritings until it achieved its final form. By that time, Christmas 1970, I had learned a great deal about myself, not to mention the figure of Moses. I shall have more to say regarding the latter when I describe more specifically the steps which led me to Christianity. Perhaps the most important element at the time of my writing Moses was the act of the writing itself. I experienced a personal freedom I had never known before, except in the more quote unquote passive activity of listening to music. But here it was I who was being the creator. And what this meant for me was that it was precisely not I who was doing the writing. While I would have a general idea each morning when I sat down to write of the quote plot elements unquote, which would have to be covered, the story after all had to coincide roughly with the Bible narrative. As I would begin to write, something else took over, and ideas, incidents, and even the literary style emerged, which I knew were not my own. Oh, this is interesting, because he's experiencing himself being taken over, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever else I may have thought, and I tended not to give it too much thought, it was clear to me that I was beginning to give up some of my conscious control and allowing the deeper parts of myself a chance to breathe. Wow,
Ah,
this is interesting. Have you ever
yeah.
had that experience?
Yeah, I can relate. I think when we do what really is contrary to our real nature, there's always this sort of lack of ease. There's a discomfort, and I think that's why, intuitively we know when we're, following insanity's propaganda that we're self-sabotaging and undermining our peace. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
Oop, did you your
this
audio
kind of gives you an idea
your audio
that
cut out for a second there?
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I don't
was
know if you can hear me now.
Yeah, I
Can you
can
hear me?
now. I can now. Yeah.
So yeah, so yesterday we were talking in one of our groups about the energy that Ken had because he wrote letters to everyone who ever wrote him a letter. He wrote them a letter back. And not only that, he was diligent with it. I mean, he was up day and night, writing letters to people,
Mhm.
giving advice to people, writing the books that he's written. I mean, how many books did he write? You know,
Lots.
and I know some of them came from workshops. So some of the
Mhm.
books actually came directly from workshops. But in general, he was writing all the time. And I can see that this inspiration that came to him was the the Holy Spirit just working through him. And what he's saying is allowing the deeper parts of myself a chance to breathe. It was the Holy Spirit coming through in him. And because he was willing to step back and allow that to happen,
Mhm.
which, we saw that in Ken throughout his life, as far as we knew. He was always just stepping back and allowing. So I'm going to let you read for a little bit. My voice is a little giving out.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
mind, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Sure. Ken continues. Moses was the first of a whole series of writings which, perhaps only now, 4 years later, appears to be ending. This period included different forms, styles, and subjects, and the writing was a fairly regular and almost essential part of my life. Its importance for me lay in the fact that, along with Beethoven's music, it provided me with a consistent link to levels of spirituality to which I otherwise could not connect. I believe then that the source of my writing and the inspiration in the music were similar. The only difference for me coming in that in Beethoven, this source acted through him to me, while now I could feel that the same creative wellspring in myself, or feel that same creative wellspring in myself, and it was something which lived totally independent of me and seemed to emerge in my writing irrespective of what was occurring in my external life. I had only to provide the time for it to occur, and it did. There were also, of course, many fallow periods, but then these would end and the writings would begin once again. I knew I certainly had no control over it. This kind of writing could not be forced. And I think probably some of us can relate to, when we get inspired, it comes through us and it oftentimes is completely independent of what seems to be happening in the level of form externally. At about the same time that the writing of Moses began, also too the first conscious awareness that something was indeed wrong with my marriage occurred, most especially as it related to my inner life. Our first 3 years together had been difficult ones, but for the most part we had been happy. During the fourth year, however, we seemed to be fighting constantly, and the fights became increasingly more resistant to reconciliation. By the time our daughter was born in June 1969, the relationship was quite strained. At the time, I was certainly not aware that the core of the problem rested in me, that somewhere along the line I had given myself to God, so that giving a relationship with any human being in the usual social sense of the word was impossible. Though I did not know it until after the breakup, the essential part of my being, my soul, had never been in the marriage, but was always held apart. However, then I knew only that something was wrong and that perhaps the solution was for me to leave. And I think since this was one of Ken's early writings, I would think that, and this is just my guess, he might say things a little differently and that more kind of more along the lines of, are changes required in the lives of God's teachers. And the immediate response in that question, no, changes are almost always required in the minds of God's teachers. But sometimes, on the level of form, it is in our best interest. But I think a lot of times, course students will say, "Oh, I must be one of the exceptions that I need to change, the externals." Well, usually that's not the case. As the course points out, and I know in a lot of Ken's work he points that out as well. So, um,
Yeah, but I think about it and think about what if instead of doing what he did, he would have stayed in the marriage, did whatever it was that society or culture expects of a father and a husband. Uh,
mhm.
would we have ever had uh, the Ken of the course that uh, I mean, for him, it probably was the thing to do was to separate and to go and be a basically a bachelor, which is basically how he lived after that. So I find it very interesting. I didn't know any of this, so I'm excited to learn about it.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shall I
So
continue on?
yeah, sure.
Okay. A short time after the baby was born, I had a very clear sense that not only must I leave my wife and child, but my profession and the country as well. Okay. This sense carried with it a real feeling of authority, and for the next day, I lived with the brief, not only that I should do it, but that I could do it. But reality rapidly returned, and I realized that whether or not it were true, I certainly was not able to do anything about it. Shortly thereafter, my wife and I more rationally discussed the possibility of separation, and since by this time I was very confused, I decided to spend the day by myself at Montauk Point, the easternmost tip of Long Island. A quick aside, just since he's mentioning that particular place and the along on, there's an interesting book called The Montauk Experiment, where I think that's the name of it, where a lot of the Philadelphia experiment maybe is also connected. I think that's the one that's connected to it. That there were some people that supposedly um, discovered that time travel while trying to achieve optical invisibility for the military Navy fleet. and
Right.
it's pretty interesting story. How much of that is factual, I don't know, but it's really a great sci-fi read. But interesting that Ken was there too. But
It
who
is.
knows if there's any connection there.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting, you may or may not have ever seen this movie, the eternal something of the spotless soul,
Sunshine of the sun,
sunshine of the spotless soul.
spotless mind. Yeah.
That's where they go. They go to Montauk.
Oh, you're right. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the first time I ever heard of Montauk. I'm like,
yeah, yeah.
that's interesting, and it stuck with me. But yeah, a lot of that activity in that movie takes place on trips that they took to Montauk. So, interesting. I have to
Who
go.
knows, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah. Anyway.
and I
Okay,
don't
so
know. Okay, go ahead.
I'll start that sentence over again. Shortly thereafter, my wife and I more rationally discussed the possibility of separation, and since by this time I was very confused, I decided to spend the day by myself at Montauk Point, the easternmost tip of Long Island. There I was alone with the ocean, which had become for me, and for the whole of the following year as well, a place of real refuge where I could hear my inner voice so clearly. The voice that day was quite distinct and definite and told me unquestionably that the marriage was over. And for the duration of my day out there, I once again lived as though I could leave, but by the time I returned home, I knew I was not strong enough. And so we lasted through another year. I was sustained by my work on Moses, and for the first few months, by spending one night and the following day each week out at Montauk, alone with the ocean and myself. But the reality of the situation could not be ignored forever. In the early spring, I suddenly developed a rash above my left eyebrow. I recognized it as psoriasis, my mother's skin condition. As I had been, as had been my custom with physical symptoms, I ignored it, though I realized it had some important implications. Soon after, I was walking along the beach at Montauk, having my usual, quote, dialogue, unquote, with the water. But the, quote, conversation, unquote, soon shifted in tone, and the message I received was loud and clear. It had come through in words which I had forgotten, but their meaning was, time is running out. Either you do something about a divorce or that rash will spread and become worse. You still have a little time to get ready, but do not waste it. That was the whole thing in quotes. I took the ocean at its word, and before too long, the whole legal business was set into motion. And immediately upon its commencements, the rash disappeared. Over the fourth weekend of 1969 occurred an experience which is probably one of the most significant I'd had. For without its gift of grace, I doubt my faith would have been strong enough to sustain me through the next 2 years. Its importance warrants, I feel, a rather detailed exposition. Should I continue? Or would you like to read?
Sure. How about if I read for a bit? Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, this is really interesting
Mhm.
because you think about Ken and you don't think about, oh, he was married and thinking about getting a divorce and all these different ideas. Um, I just don't see Ken because I never saw that before. But he had a daughter and a wife and we don't hear about them. I mean, I have heard in some of his recordings now him talking about having grandsons and that kind of stuff. But I always just envisioned Ken being a bachelor until he met Gloria. So so this is all interesting to me. All right. So by the week preceding the 3-day holiday weekend, our lawyers had both served the appropriate summons, and we were now awaiting a court date. For legal reasons, my lawyer had advised me to continue to live in our house, and so I remained staying in my downstairs office. I actually spent very little time there, and my wife and I said very little to each other, and then only if it involved the baby. At the end of the month, when the lease was up, I would be free to leave and move to Poughkeepsie, about 80 miles from New York, and have a new job. And a new job. What? Poughkeepsie was about 80 miles from New York and a new job. Okay. So Wednesday night of that week, I was served with the most unexpected second summons, instigated by a most tragic accident which had befallen our daughter, miraculously ending up with no permanent injury or damage. The summons accused me of untold horrors and cruelties. It had the most devastating effect on me. On one level, I was frightened because being at that time new to the quote unquote legal game, I felt I was in considerable danger. But when my lawyer quickly explained the true nature of the situation to me and knew exactly how to handle it, I felt relieved of that fear and trusted the whole matter to him. But my deeper response caused me considerable anxiety. I had trouble visualizing it, but the feeling was that my very soul had been attacked. Raped is probably a better word, and I was powerless to do anything about it. Moreover, the pain of that violation remained, and no amount of reason nor reality could alleviate or comfort that deep hurt. And of course, my curious mind is like, what happened? But we're not going to hear any details, I'm sure. Uh, uh, but wow. Meanwhile, I had been planning to visit a good friend of mine and his wife in upstate New York, but by Friday morning, still could not reach them. I knew, however, I had to get away, and so planned to drive up anyway, perhaps to go to the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts and walk in the woods. But then, just before shaving in preparation to leave, I did a very curious thing. My wife had already left with the baby to be away all day, and for no rational reason that I knew, I felt a very strong desire to, quote, protect two books by D.H. Lawrence, Sons and Lovers and The Rainbow, by locking them in my car trunk, and did so. Wow. In general, regarding the property of the house, there had been no problem in deciding who kept what. I was concerned only with my share of the books and the records, and that too, to a large extent, seemed to present no problem of what belonged to whom. But there were a number of quote unquote gray books, of which both of us had truly liked, and Lawrence's were among them. For a while, he had been one of my teachers, and these two books had been particularly important to me. I felt so close to them that at that moment I could not conceive of their being taken away from me, and so I had to immediately put them away. That done, I proceeded to get ready, but had barely finished dressing when I became suddenly seized, and that truly was the word to express what happened, by the thought that my soul was in danger and that I must get everything that belonged to it out of the house. I no longer thought. I felt its truth and acted. I quickly made arrangements with my mother, an hour and a half away in Brooklyn, and put all of my records and books in cartons and loaded them in my car, together with my clarinet, music, and assorted other personal possessions. Because of the large collection of records and books, I had to make 2 trips. The whole process from beginning to end took about 7 hours, but I was like a man possessed and hardly noticed the time nor the energy it took. Only when it was done and everything was quote unquote safe did I feel the fatigue. But inwardly, I felt no different. My soul still felt dead, and I did not know what more I could do. However, I was able finally to reach my friend, and so planned to go upstate the following morning. Shortly after I arrived, I went off by myself and played Schubert's Die Winterreise, Die Winterreise, from beginning to end on my clarinet. It is a series of 24 songs which very tragically tell the story of a rejected lover who wanders through the snow, accompanied near the end by a raven, and ends up losing his mind and joining with a hurdy-gurdy man and his monkey. It gave me some, oh my God, it gave me some comfort for it, fit my mood perfectly, as I certainly felt as if something in me had died, and I had never known that feeling before. To be sure, there had been many moments of anxiety, pain, depression, fear, even terror, but at least at those times I felt alive, knew my soul was there, and that the inner movement was real. But now it seemed that there was nothing inside, and I felt empty and dead, a mere physical shell. Wow. My friend and I took a walk by some waterfalls, and I again felt comforted as I was able to speak of this to somebody else and to be understood as well. But the feeling of deadness remained. Later in the afternoon, we went to a 4th of July party, but I went off by myself in the road and fields, walking in the rain which had chased away the sun. It certainly seemed appropriate. By Sunday morning, the sun had returned, and it was a beautiful, clear day. My friend suggested we climb a mountain which was not too far from their house. It didn't much matter to me what we did, and although it did not particularly feel in the mood for a mountain climbing, it did seem as if it were a good idea. My friend then described the climb and said that there was a point not far from the top where one had a choice. The way to which led directly up was risky and dangerous, for it meant climbing over rocks without a path, while to walk around and up was relatively easy. We joked about what we would do, and I myself did not know which way I would go. But as I did not feel too strong or confident, I felt sure I would choose the long and safe way around. It was quite a long walk to that choice point, and I spent part of the time in meaningless chatter and part in silence, but not feeling anything too deeply. Then we were suddenly there, and once again something inside me took over. My friend's wife went off to the right, but I motioned to my friend to continue straight up. I cannot objectively evaluate the difficulty or danger of the climb, but I know only that I felt nothing but to the desire to get to the top as quickly as possible. Nothing seemed to matter, and I did not for a minute consider any kind of danger. My friend was going first, but he suddenly stopped a short distance from the top and said it was too dangerous and that he was going back. My friend is a very good athlete and had previously made this climb. Perhaps I should have listened to his warning. Instead, I bounded past him in a manner later described to me as reckless. And though I do not recall how, within moments had made it to the top. I stood up and all at once filled with a tremendous surge of strength, energy, and new life. The top was actually a plateau of a rather large area, and I began to race exuberantly from one end to the other, loudly singing the triumphant final movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Da 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 da. That I ran and ran, singing over and over again the thrilling music that was Beethoven's expression of having risen above the dark night. That was the symphony's third movement. My soul was alive once more, now stronger than ever, and I guess only Beethoven's music can convey the wonderful feeling of the regained flow of life bursting through me. I ran until I was worn out and then lay down in a feeling of beautiful peace and quiet joy. Tears began to flow down my face, and with them came a feeling of deep, deep gratitude for a grace I could not have come from me. And then, as the expression of that feeling welled up from my soul, the sublime melody of the slow movement of Beethoven's A minor quartet, Op 115, known as the Heiliger, Heiliger Dankensong, Heiliger Dankensong, Sacred Song of Thanks, which Beethoven composed to God after recovering from what he believed to be a fatal illness. For me, it had always been the movement of Beethoven that I felt closest to, and now spontaneously arose from within me to express my thanksgiving to God or whomever for restoring me to life. I lay there for quite some time, and then found my friends, and we returned home. I played the recording of that same movement, the recording I had bought for my friend some time before, and I was sure it had been for this very moment. Once more the tears flowed, and my soul offered up to its benefactor its deepest gratitude. I continued with the final two triumphant, life-energized movements, and at their close felt once again my normal self. Only now my soul was not only alive, but had with it the conviction that it could never and would never die again. I did not know still that it was God, but I did know that there was something with a capital S which had engineered that experience and which had seen to it in that my soul would live on, and that something was inside me and greater than anything I could imagine myself as being. And from that moment on, I consciously placed all of my faith and trust in that inner force and knew that no matter what happened in the future, I could never be hurt. For it, with a capital I, would always be with me, and only my blindness to that capital R reality, what I was beginning to understand was the only capital R reality, could make me vulnerable to the world. I knew I would never be alone, for it had always been with me, watching over my life. Wow.
Mhm.
I just decided to read that whole thing because I wanted to see that whole experience.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we've all probably had glimpses of things like that where we realize, that we have been guided and that we are completely dependent ultimately on what do you call it, divine providence, the creator, God. The label doesn't matter, but there's something greater than yourself. I mean, that's sort of an AA phrase, I suppose. Not that I've been in AA, but I know several fellow course students that have uh, talked about that. But that trusting in something beyond oneself, and our language doesn't really do it justice, but I think there's an intuitive understanding that what is beyond us really has to be all inclusive, even if we don't even really get what that means either. But I think that's what the course is asking us to consider. It's like, well, if I leave anyone out, then I'm blocking my awareness and experience of that, if you will, divine guidance, protection, support, and really identity. Um, and what comes with that is the peace, and the peace really is the foundation for going beyond where the course can take us. But the practice of forgiveness gives us to that foundational platform of consistent peace, um, so that we can progress as we were meant to do. And Ken
Yeah,
demonstrated there with his experience out in mountain climbing and music and other things that reflected that choice in his mind. He would probably, would suspect he would probably describe those experiences in those terms too, or something like that.
yeah.
And I think he
Well,
has.
yeah, and it is so interesting that I mean, this was a tremendous amount of turmoil. And I'm sure, I mean, I'm thinking about his friends who were like, let's go climb up here. And then all of a sudden him like, I'm going to go up this hardest part here. And then I'm going to get up to the top and just run around like a maniac. And then finally just lay down in the, I mean, obviously they had to have been imagining that it was the stress of the divorce, all the emotional turmoil that he had been going through. They were probably surmising, what was going on in his mind. I'm sure he couldn't really relate to them what was really happening, but uh just, I mean, this whole frantic business of him, suddenly deciding that he wanted all his books and his music, he wanted to make sure that he had them. I was thinking, wow, he had moved them all, and then maybe the house caught on fire or something after he moved out. I don't know. Obviously that didn't happen, or he would have mentioned, I'm sure. But what's the purpose of uh making sure that you had all of these things that these beautiful things that uh, that I love, that he this is sort of, uh if I had a friend who was doing all these things, I would think they were having some sort of a breakdown. Personally, that would be my thought. Something is happening here that is not, that is not good. But really, what it resulted in was this sense of freedom that he says never went away. He had this knowing and this trust in this inner voice that that stayed with him his entire life. So, I don't know, I just think it's really interesting. I'm glad he wrote about it.
Yeah, it is. And I keep thinking this, like, well, there's each of us have had moments in our lives that have been inspirational and where we felt guided, and other times where we felt lost. And it would seem like the times when we felt lost is when we've um, really ignored the guidance. One one example of and it's sort of a pragmatic one, but I remember when I was at college, I never really thought much about locking my bike, to just go to a class or something. And one evening I went to the the student union building for I think it was a rhetoric group communication uh, meeting, and we're talking about some project we were working on as a team. And I started walking away from my bike, and had this sort of like kind of feeling grabbed me by the gut. You should lock your bike. I said, nah. And so I ignored it. And when I came back, the bike was gone. but I think we all have those intuitive moments and experiences where we realize, we do get guidance. And the course, I think, really strongly suggests that if we stay on that rung of the ladder, we're limiting ourselves. And the real guidance is to see that everything in this world is a reflection of our thought. And the the big limitation is thinking that we are stuck in a world that has to do with space and time. And our space time, as physicists call it, because it's just one thing. And that if we limit ourselves to that, we're basically um, self-enslaving ourselves to the ego's tyranny. And that's needless. So,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. It's just an insane reaction to
Yeah.
an insane thought system, insane world. And I'm thinking about the whole business of him going to Montauk. And I never went there, but my husband did a lot of work up at the Brookhaven uh,
Mm-hmm.
National Lab, which is, as you probably know, uh,
I know of it anyway. I
know of it,
haven't
yeah,
been
that
there
it's
either,
the
but
Department of Energy. And
uh-huh.
so, and that's kind of up in that area. And so whenever I think about that area, I think about, all sorts of things. And also, I was just looking it up, and have you seen that television show called Stranger Things?
I know of it. I haven't
No,
really
you
watched
know
any
of
of
it.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's based, I guess, on the experiments that they apparently did at Montauk.
Oh, okay.
That's the basis of it, and it's, like all time bending and everything like that. So I just find it interesting, all these things that have to do with another reality uh being um being part of Ken's life at this time. um anyway, gosh, oh my, I'm just looking at the clock.
Yeah, we're just about out of time in a couple
We're heading
minutes. Yeah.
up to the end of the time.
Yep.
uh
Yep.
I think he's gonna have to move to Poughkeepsie next week, because
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds
I'm
good.
gonna mark
I'm gonna
it.
grab that and put that in my notes since I don't have a way to bookmark my digital copy very well. Yep.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see what else is new and interesting. Well, I was going to mention that, yeah, Lynn, you and I should have a Zoom session sometime and talk about um, what we can do with the acimgather.us website and things like that, and other collaborative possibilities. And but we can do that offline. And anyway, as always, I very much enjoy our regular Saturday morning conversations, and it's always helpful, inspiring, and fun.
Thank you so much, Bruce Rawls. I love you, brother. And
Us.
just, as long as I've known you for a very long time, comparatively to a lot of other people that I know. And you've always been a source of great comfort and inspiration to me. I so appreciate, you.
Well,
Uh,
it's very mutual. Very mutual.
Grateful.
We're really blessed to have not only the course but wonderful online communities that we're all involved in, and the support that we get from that is hard to fathom and measure, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is, but it's such a wonderful thing, and I'm just so grateful. So I'm going to go ahead and close off this YouTube. Of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe and like and all that business. And also, if you're on YouTube, make sure you look up in the banner where our name and everything is. It's got the links to our radio and our website. So you can always click on either one of those, listen to us 24/7 on the radio, or you can go to our schedule and find out when we have these different meetings and groups, and you can join us. And that's always a lot of fun too. So thank you once again. Thank you.